The Mishnah in the third parak of Pirkei Avos version that I have, the third Mishnah. Some have it as the fourth. Mishnah says, Rabbi Shimon Oimer, Shloisha she'achlu al shulchan echad v'lo yomru alav divrei Torah. If you have three people who are eating at a table together and they didn't say words of Torah, kilu achlu mezivchei mesim. It's as if they're eating from the offerings of the dead. The commentators explain this is referring to idolatry. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, ki kol shulchanois, all of their tables in plural. Malukia v'sower, filled. They are filled with vomit and feces, bli makom, without Hashem. Aval shloisha sha'achlu al shulchan echad. But if you have three people who ate on one table, v'amru alav divrei Torah, and they said Torah on the table, kilu achlu mishulchanu shel makom. It says if they ate from the table of Hashem. Shnemar, as the pasuk says, v'yadaber elai zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem. This is the table that is in front of Hashem. A lot to talk about over here. Rashi explains that they didn't say Torah, they exempted themselves from the obligation of saying Torah because they benched. Bartenura says this, Tiferes Yisroel says this. The obvious question on this, which the Magen Avraham already discussed in the beginning of Siman Kuf Ayin, is everyone benches. Benching is a full-fledged obligation. Are we talking about that we're dealing with wicked people who don't bench? To say that benching counts is an incredible chiddush. You're obligated to bench. Tremendous leniency that Rashi is saying. The general halacha is not that way. You need actual Torah. Rashi explains Zivche Mesim is referring to idols. Someone who doesn't say Torah at his meal is considered to have worshipped idolatry. But once he says Torah, this is the table that's in front of Hashem. Chazal teaches, to Gemara and Brachos Nun, the end of Chagiga Chav Zayin, Bizman Shebeis Mikdash Kayim Mizbeach Mechaper Al Adam. When the Mizbeach was around, when the Beis Hamikdash was around, the Mizbeach would atone for a person. But nowadays, that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, bavel Naseina or Abim, due to our great sins and iniquities, Shulchana Shel Adam Mechaper, the table of a person atones. In other words, our table comes in place instead of the Mizbeach. This is why the halacha is brought down. Not to leave a knife on the table when you bench, perhaps at least during the week. One of the reasons a knife shortens the life of a person, and the table is supposed to lengthen life, just like a mizbeach. Whole discussion if that implies on Shabbos Yantif or not. Shran Simon Kuf Pei and Shulchan Aruch, and the Simon there. So that's the table. There's a lot of halachic ramifications, but before we delve into that, we see that our table helps us atone like the mizbeach. The Midrash Shmuel explained, someone who doesn't say words of Torah at his table won't be able to get that atonement. Think about that. And he's considered to have eaten from idolatries. Simple explanation, Pashut Pshat, the Torah transforms the table into a mizbeach. Another explanation is, when we share our food with someone poor, that transforms our table into mizbeach. Mishna Berurah, Siman Kuf Samach Zayin, Os Lamed discusses this. And therefore, we have to be careful with many things when we eat. For example, the Chidah, based on his understanding of a Sefer Chasidim, the Chidah in a Sefer Yosef Ometz, based on a Sefer Chasidim and Siman Tuf Kuf Chaf, says that a child shouldn't walk on a table. A lot of times people, they put the child in the tuchas on the table. Not supposed to do that. You wouldn't do that on Mizbeach. Sefer Chasidim and Siman Kuf Chaf says that it's prohibited to kill a louse on the table. Kaf Chaim and Sivkatan Mem Aleph over there in Siman Kuf Samach Zayin says it's prohibited to kill any bug that's on the table, because you wouldn't kill a bug on the Mizbeach. Or Aruch Hashulchan over there in Siman Kuf Samach Zayin Sivkatan Yud Beis says it's prohibited to do anything that is disgusting on the table. Can't place something disgusting on the table as well. Dirty diaper, etc. Why does the Mishnah specify shloisha she'achlu, three people that ate? Why not two? Why not four? Why not five? Why
Wait, is it
specifically three? So,
is this talking about Shabbos or the whole week? The
whole
same
week,
table.
any meal, good question. Any meal that you have three people, but why three? So we're going to provide 6 answers to this question. Taisvis Yomtov explains, two people who are just schmoozing, they're conversing with one another and they don't say Torah, they're considered accidental, so to say. But once you have three people, you got no excuse. The third party is going to come along and say, why aren't you talking Torah? Three is like the Warner. Reason two comes along the Rashbam and says that this Mishnah said three because three people, you got a Zeman over there. That's the norm, three people. It might be Lav Dafka three. Okay, Rashbam. Reason three, the Rishon LeZion says, at least one of the three people is going to be learned. He's going to have some Torah to say.
But let's say
May I add, hopefully.
three who don't know anything.
May I add, hopefully. That's what I added.
Yeah, you gotta hopefully, but
Yeah.
let's say then
Hopefully.
it's out. Then
Comes with Rishon
that's-
LeZion. Then we have bigger problems we have to deal with. We're assuming if there's three, one of them at least has something to say.
I'm saying, but it makes
At least one
logical
thing to
sense to say like once you have no one who's learned, then this thing would be out because it's too harsh to expect someone who's not learned to.
That's why I'm here. I'm trying to get
What do
my
you mean?
message out.
You're
I'm trying to get my Torah out.
You walk around tables at the
No,
restaurant?
that's why I put this online. I try to get my message out, make sure people are listening. Instead of the diluted and distorted Torah, which is inaccurate, all the filth that's out there. This is real Torah. That stuff is fake Torah. Distorted Torah. Reason 4, Tiferes Yisroel explains, one or two people who eat, they might not have time to say Torah. Three or more people who are gathered together, they got time. If they wouldn't have time, they wouldn't have been eating together. They got time. If you got time, you better be saying Torah. Comes along the Maxor Vitri and explains, the Mishnah doesn't mean three. This applies to one or two people. The Mishnah only said three because the pasuk says shulchanos, which is plural for tables, and the average table has three people. Reason 6, Maram Shik explains, two people who ate together, they could have just happened to been at the same place. Happens to be that they were at the same place. Right? However, three people ate together, that's not a coincidental meeting. They're not just coincidental acquaintances. They're a group. That's a chabura. That demonstrates friendship, and therefore it's a problem if there's no Torah over there. Why does it say sholcha she'achlu? Three people that ate. It doesn't say three people that are eating. The first Shela explains that you're not allowed to talk when you eat. That's why. We discussed on Tainus on Daf when we learned Lamed Beis. You can't converse when you're talking because you might choke. It might go down the wrong pipe. Might go down the windpipe instead of the esophagus. Now we discussed in Siman Kofai, and you have the Shari Tshuva. He quotes the Drisha over there who says that that's only back then when they would eat when they were reclining. So there was a concern that when they would recline and they would talk, they would choke. Conversely, nowadays that doesn't apply because we sit straight. When we eat, we just sit straight up, not reclining. So there's no concern of choking. Even so, the Mishna Berurah seems to say that and hold that it would still be a problem nowadays. However, if it's between courses, it's not a problem. Going back to the Tiferes Yisroel, that's why it says that they ate. When they're done eating, they say the Torah before they get up. Everyone should say the amount of Torah that they're capable of saying. And when we say the Torah, that will help us realize that we're eating to live, we don't live to eat. Because if we're just living to eat, what's the difference between us and an animal that are just trying to fulfill the temporary desires? We're no different. Rather, we're only eating to live. That's the chap. That's the chap.
Wait, why is there a chiyuv to say if I just heard that really eating is a vote in itself, right? So why is there be obligation to do other things while we're eating? Why can't we just
This
eat?
week it said, so that it will demonstrate that we're eating in order to have strength to serve Hashem. That we're not just eating to fulfill our temporary desires and lusts. That's the avod of eating. That's why we weren't created, by the way, in a way that we don't need to eat. Why not Hashem just create us in a way that we don't need to eat, we don't need to sleep, we don't need to drink? One answer is just, how are we going to eat? Are we going to eat like humans or are we going to eat like animals? Are we going to stuff our face? Are we going to have some Torah at the table? Are we going to say bracha before and after? How are we going to do it? How are we going to make the money to put bread on the table? In a way that's stealing or in a way that's good? What's the connection between this Mishnah and the previous one? Medrash Shmuel explains, for a person eats, he should also learn Torah. Many times when we're eating, we're unable to open up the Sefer. Can't open it up. So therefore, we should talk about what we remember from what we learned. Second answer, previous Mishnah said two people who say Torah, the divine presence of Hashem dwells among them. Mishnah is telling us that this is especially important to say Torah during the meal. Why is there an obligation to say Torah during the meal? What is so important about it? Yabet's come along and says that the previous Mishnah was talking about two people who are sitting together and they didn't say Torah, considered a sitting of scoffers, excuse me.
But isn't this a little harsh? They didn't do anything wrong. They're just passive.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a little bit harsh.
I mean, if a person doesn't bring the Korban Pesach, he gets kares. Person doesn't have Mila, which is passively done, he gets kares.
This is different. This
Yeah.
There's a milestone. Like
If you don't shake lulav, if you don't blow shofar,
those are special events. This is like
right. Or why is there an obligation to say Torah during the meal? Good question. Yabetz explains the previous Mishnah said two people who sit together and don't say words of Torah is considered a sitting of scoffers. Therefore, three people who ate together and don't say any Torah, they're even more liable and guilty to be punished. Explanation 2. Yabetz quotes the Gemara in Brachos that says that someone who gets pleasure from a wedding meal has to gladden the groom or bride. Same applies to us. We get pleasure from a meal, we have to gladden Hashem, aka by saying words of Torah. The Knesset Yisroel explains based on a Gemara. The Gemara says, "Im Psachim Kuf Yerches, Kashem is a noisiv shaldim kekriyas yamsuf. Making money is as difficult as the splitting of the sea." Obviously, a lot of explanations to that, which we've also discussed in the past. One explanation is Hashem had to destroy his creations at the sea, the Egyptians, in order to bequeath, to instill within the Jewish people emunah, faith and belief in Hashem. And that Hashem is involved with everything in this world, making living as difficult in order that we contemplate, that we work hard to put food on the table and enable our survival. We have to work hard and realize if we're working hard for physicalities, certainly for spiritual endeavors, we have to work hard for the soul. That's why we have to say Torah precisely during the meal to remind us, and this will demonstrate and remind us that our main focus on this world has to be spiritual pursuits. So a story one time with one of the students of the Vilna Gaon. And he was one time at a table and he said, 3 people who ate at a table and don't say words of Torah, it's as if they ate from idols. The Vilna Gaon said, guess what? You just said Torah. You're off the hook. You're exempted. As the Vilna Gaon came along and said, cute idea. This quote about the Sifting the Al Kapir on page 16, quoting the Panini Hagra. At the end of the day, we have to say Torah. We see the importance. A lot of times you have people, you go, fancy meals, hundreds of dollars, all of this, that. There's no Torah Kadosh. There's no Torah Kadosh. What's your meal?
Benching?
Yeah. Benching. Again, general halacha is not that way. That doesn't count as Torah. Because you're obligated to bench.
No, I'm saying they don't. Wait.
Oh, you're saying people who don't bench. Yeah, that's another problem.
You don't bench, but
that's already another problem. It's already another problem.
You have a very fancy meal without bread.
We're talking about religious Jews. Religious Jews, they're benching. In the Suda, instead of having Torah, it's filled with slander and derogatory information.
I'm talking about a Suda that's very fancy.
Me too. It's filled with smack. Get that out of there. Get the Torah HaKadosh in there. Questions, comments?
Yeah, that's my question.
No, I'm talking about, is the obligation the same whether it's a Suda or, let's say, right, so let's say you just had water together, right? It's a shahakol. You sit down at a table, you have water together, versus having a steak together. You're still making the same bracha, but it's 100.
Suda b'pash just means that you washed.
All right, so let's say
and
this
you're
guy.
Having bread.
If
what?
Are they over? Are they?
It's not a meal. It's drinking together.
Are they over an Isser? Are they over an Isser?
If be Torah Kadosh, for sure.
Are they over an Isser?
Look, you got to do it in a smart way. You're sitting down for a high stakes business meeting. You got millions of dollars on the line. You just throw something clever in that's Torah based. That's Torah. You got to just throw it in. See. It could be like, the smart person is someone who learns from everyone else. That's the first mission of the fourth paragraph. Avos. You throw in some sort of line that applies. There's plenty of amazing lines that you could just put in there.
Right, but I'm saying the norm is that unfortunately it's more likely to encounter inappropriate speech, and what I'm saying is if someone doesn't speak Torah,
that's precisely why we're here.
And they